about Donald Trump and his attacks on Congressman Cummings, and then today on Al Sharpton. I mean, all weekend people attacked him, but for some reason he had to go after Al Sharpton on Twitter by name. And we're going to talk about you and your backstory, and I want people to know about you as a person. But what's your reaction right here at the top? The idea of Donald Trump's attack, saying no human being would live in the area of Baltimore, which is primarily black.
Donald Trump is a racist. It's something I've been saying for a long time. And when I first said that, I got a lot of backlash. I mean, I was the first person in Congress to just say that we got to pay attention to what happened in Germany in the 1930s when Hitler was democratically elected. I didn't say Trump equals Hitler, but I did say the rise of Trump has some parallels with what happened in Germany. Of course, I got terrible backlash. It wasn't 6 or 8 months later that even conservatives, the anti-Trump Republicans, were making some of those same comparisons. So that's just a fact. He's a racist. He's been one throughout his entire career. I mean, from when he first denied black people housing with the money that his dad gave him early on in his famed failing business career.
We were talking before you came here about 1973, and I read some of the news reports about how the building superintendent testified under oath that he was told to put a C on the documents, applications of black people for color. But so let me give you a formal introduction. Here's Congressman Seth Moulton, a Democrat from Massachusetts' 6th Congressional District. He's a veteran of the U.S. Marine Corps, served 4 tours of duty in Iraq. He's got 3 degrees from Harvard University, and now is a 2020 candidate running for president. So, Congressman, first, there's a great photo article about you yesterday in the New York Times. I encourage people to check that out.
You.
It was good to see. I thought it was really ingenious the way they did the whole spread. Like, you click on it and these things come to life. I thought it was great. So, I want to talk about you as a person first, because people might know you from politics. They might know you were involved in challenging Speaker Pelosi, little things. But let's talk about you. So, first of all, do you have a political hero? Let me ask you that at the top.
A political hero. I mean, look, I have American political heroes, but one person I've always respected is Winston Churchill because, I mean, he truly brought the best of out of Britain in the worst of times, and he had his own faults and failures in politics along the way, but he was a leader of the moment when the nation called, and I have a lot of respect for that.
I always liked about Churchill is that in the middle of, like, Hitler was marching through Europe, and there at the same time, Churchill's this clarion call about how bad Hitler is, but he was also writing a book at the time to make money that he needed to write a book.
Yep, and he was able to have a good time as well. I mean,
well, of course, and that's the truth. So, and
he was actually, I mean, for all his amazing quotes and his sort of famous lifestyle or whatever, he was actually a pretty down to earth guy who liked to have a cigar and a lot of
alcohol and stayed up all night. Like there's famous things with him and FDR hanging out in the White House when he came to visit during World War II, and he'd be up to like 2 a.m. And I think FDR would go to bed early. And there is Churchill, if I remember correctly, maybe FDR, but they were together, but I can't remember if FDR went to bed early or not. But there was Churchill up all night eating and drinking, and then stayed up all night. And that was his way to get work done.
Oh, you got to live life too.
You got it. So you joined the Marine Corps after you graduated from Harvard, 2001. This is before 9/11.
Right.
So what caused you to join the U.S. Marines?
The most important mentor I've ever had in life was actually the minister of my college church. And his name was Peter Gomes. Quite a man of a contradiction in terms. He was a gay, Republican, black, American Baptist minister at Harvard.
Wow.
Okay. He was such a Republican that he actually held the Bible at Reagan's second inaugural before he said, look, the Republican Party has left me, and he became a Democrat so that he could vote for one of his students, who was not me. It was Deval Patrick, who, of course, is the governor of Massachusetts. And Peter was an amazing individual, one of the greatest men I've ever met. And he talked a lot about the importance of service, about how it's not enough just to believe in service or support others. You got to find a way to give back yourself. I mean, he was hoping I would go to divinity school, I think. But
that's interesting, right?
But I looked at different options, Peace Corps, teaching overseas. But sitting in this church that was dedicated to the men and women who had fought and died in wars from that school, I just said, you know what? I've got so much respect for these 17 and 18-year-old kids, that's how young they are, who fight on the front lines of our nation's military, that's where I wanted to do my part. So I knew I wanted to be in the infantry, on the ground. I didn't want to be sitting in a truck when some 17-year-old was slogging through the mud next to me. But I didn't know that September 11th would happen 3 months after I graduated. I certainly didn't know that I'd end up in the first company of Marines into Baghdad, or that I'd end up doing 4 tours in that war, a war that I was an outspoken critic of, by the way.
I know.
That's what was going on.
That's what's interesting, that you were. But during your service, I mean, you received two decorations for valor, the Bronze Star and the Navy Marine Corps Commendation. How was that? I'm not going to ask how you got those. You can share that if you like to. But how was your service and this commendations and what you did there and what you learned in the military impact you as you sit here today as a person, and how as president would have an impact on you?
Well, I just wouldn't be in politics, period, if not for that experience, because I'm not someone who grew up planning to be president since I was 4 years old. In fact, I wasn't involved in politics at all. I mean, candidly, I didn't appreciate how important politics is until I saw the consequences of failed leadership in Washington when I was in Iraq. And I saw those consequences in very personal and human terms with people whose lives were cut short because of political decisions, mistakes made by leaders in Washington, D.C., who were totally out of touch with what was going on the ground there. So that's why I ran in the first place. I took on an 18-year incumbent in Massachusetts. I obviously didn't know much about politics, or else I wouldn't have taken on an 18-year incumbent, right? We did our first poll when I was 7 months into the race, and I was only 53 points down.
Wow. So,
I mean, I'm not even 53 points behind Biden right now, right?
So this is actually going pretty well, the way you look at it.
Right.
Like that
I know,
record.
my pollster at the time said, Seth, I'm sorry, it's statistically impossible for you to win this race. He told me I should get out, but much like this race, the response I was hearing on the ground was very different. You know, the response I was getting from voters wasn't reflected in the polls yet, but I knew my message was resonating. Now, look, we made some changes. I switched out campaign managers. We made some strategic adjustments, but I ended up winning that race by 11 points. And then went on to win a tough general election in a formerly frontline district, which meant it was a top Republican target. This district, in the same year I won, voted by 13 points for our Republican governor, but it voted by 14 points for me. Wow. So it's actually I know it's Massachusetts, but it's a tough district for Democrats. It has been historically. It's flipped back and forth. And I learned a lot from being an underdog in that race and for just fighting for what I believed in and connecting with the voters, even when the party establishment. I mean, look, the party establishment told me, Seth, not only are you going to lose this race, but you'll never be involved in Massachusetts politics again because you're daring to take on our established guy. And think about it. What they were saying to me was, Seth, do not participate in the democracy you just risked your life to defend.
And and did it have an impact on you after you won? Once you did the establishment continue to fight you, or did at some point they embrace you?
No, I mean, look, they embraced me when I became the nominee and then went to Washington, but I didn't owe them anything, and that's a big difference with a lot of people who go to Washington and immediately have all this loyalty they feel, or they just have this obligation to be loyal to leadership or whatever. Look, I just have been honest. I mean, I'm not afraid to criticize. I mean, I'm a huge Barack Obama fan, but I criticized him when I disagreed with his foreign policy. I'm someone who's been able to praise Nancy Pelosi when I think she's doing a good job, like in her negotiations with Trump, but also say it's okay to say we need to have a democratic conversation in this party about a new generation of leaders that are coming in and want some representation.
And there was something else you did I was taken by, and on a much lighter side here. In Iraq, you did a TV show, Moulton and Muhammad, where you went on Iraq TV. So tell people who Muhammad is in this scenario and how
Muhammad is one of my heroes. I mean, first of all, this is just an example of how we had no plan whatsoever for what to do after the invasion, right? So all these different lieutenants were assigned to work with the police department, the fire department, the agriculture department. They assigned me to work with the Iraqi media because, Marine Corps believes a free press is important to a democracy. Sure. And the Iraqis had no experience with this. I mean, they had Baghdad Bob in the Ministry of Information, right? Before we had Fox News, they had Baghdad Bob, right? And so that's all they knew. So I went to work to get this TV station up and running and teach them how to do an evening news broadcast. That's why Muhammad and I decided to do our own show.
And he was your translator.
So he was my translator.
Right.
Sorry,
So he's an Iraqi. And then you met him, and he worked with you as a translator.
And we started doing a couple of little TV spots that became wildly popular. And I mean, I don't want to diminish you in any way or the importance of your show, but I'm just saying, when I used to walk out of the building in Iraq, people there would be asking for autographs and
you know what? I can't even get a cab in this town, let alone people know who I am. Although on Twitter, some of the right-wing people know who I am, and they come at me all the time.
No, you're amazing.
You did this TV show, and then you guys became famous. I saw the interview on Seth Meyers' show. I know Seth, and you were on Seth's show talking about how people knew you, and
they knew us, and we became really good friends. But of course, the tough part for Muhammad is they knew him too, and they considered him a collaborator. The insurgents did, not the Iraqi citizens. They loved our show. We got great ratings if they exist, right? But they, the insurgents targeted him and his family, and he eventually came to America seeking asylum, like so many people at the southern border today. And I mean, I don't know if this is for a fact, but I'm probably the only candidate in this race whose family has actually taken in an asylum refugee, and that was Muhammad when he came here.
I saw an article about you in 2007. You're just a young guy. I mean, you're still a young guy, but I'm saying like you were like a kid there, and there you are with Muhammad and talking about him staying in your house. I was like, well, this is amazing. And it also goes to showing your sincerity and how much, like when you talk about these issues, it's not just words. Like you had him stay with you. What happened with his application? Did it work out, I hope?
It eventually did, but it was really tough.
Okay.
And the bureaucracy is pretty, I mean, we had to get I had to convince some friend to be a pro bono lawyer to take on his case. She's actually amazing. Her name's Jenny from Boston, and she kind of turned it into a practice, and she has actually taught a course at Yale Law School on doing this kind of asylum law that all started with Muhammad's case. But we've got to take care of our allies, and Muhammad risked his life not just for Iraq but for America.
Yeah.
And we got to take care of people like that, and that's why I've been so out there. Like when the whole Syrian refugee crisis, when the president tried to ban Syrian refugees, I said no, that's wrong. And it was a place where I was again against the polls. The president actually had the polls on his side on that issue, even in Massachusetts, if you can believe it. But I knew Muhammad's case very personally, and I know we got to take care of our friends.
It's sad that sometimes good people get scared by the rhetoric of fear, and it works. And then, because I was going to ask you, what was your reaction when Trump in December 2015 called for a total and complete shutdown on all Muslims coming to this country, not just Syrian refugees, but he wanted to ban an entire faith group from this country? To me, it was such a slap in the face. I'm Muslim. My dad is a refugee, Palestinian refugee who's Muslim who came to this country. This is what America represented. My grandparents are Sicilians. They came from Italy here for the promise of America. But as Catholics, they were demonized when they came here. And to see a guy at the time, almost a GOP nominee, calling for a ban on a faith group was horrific to me. And what was your reaction when you heard that, especially with your relationship with Muhammad and serving and putting your life on the line to help Muslims in Iraq, to be honest?
When we invaded Muhammad's country, right, Iraq, and we came up and he lived in this society where you step out of line and you get literally killed. His father was killed by Saddam's security forces for being out of line. And yet when Muhammad saw the Americans, he was one of the first people to go up and volunteer. Why? Because he believed in our values. Even as an Iraqi citizen behind this media blackout in this country that he'd never met an American. He used to watch, know a little bit about America through smuggled movies, right? But he believed in our values. That's how powerful our values are. And this president is doing everything he can to completely undermine our values.
I agree with you. And it's funny, I'm laughing because of your point about our media going to the Middle East, because I've been in the Middle East countless times, and informing them about who we are. Now it's a lot easier because Facebook and YouTube are instantaneous. But my fiance is from the Middle East. She learned about America. She came to America, I'm not even joking, because she saw Sex and the City and loved that. She was, I want to live in New York. This is great. I'm not even kidding. She's an actress. She's talked about this like on a one-person show she did, but it's not even a joke. That's literally, she saw this glimmering place of New York City where you could be free and you're a woman and no one questions what you're doing. And there's patriarchy in every faith group, but clearly in the Middle East, if you're a Muslim woman, there's going to be a lot there. And she wanted to come into a country where she can be who she wanted to be. And it's really been great. And it's because of social media. Because of TV.
We have the largest arsenal of nuclear weapons the world has ever seen. Muhammad didn't come and work for us because he said, oh, these guys have a lot of nukes, right? He came to us because of our values, and he risked his life. And I'll tell you one more quick story. At one point while we were doing this TV show, he used to show up every morning at the front gate of our little base, and we went out in town. I mean, these are the days when we were driving around Iraq in a pickup truck right after the invasion.
Wow.
And he'd show up every morning. And then one morning he showed up and he said, Seth, I have to quit. And I said, why, Mom? I said, well, insurgents came to my house the night before and threatened my family. He didn't want to quit because he knew the work. We were sort of one glimmer of hope for all the problems with the Iraq war. We were actually spreading democracy. We were doing a good thing. We were introducing them to the importance of a free press. And so he said, well, I'll finish the show that we're working on this week. So the next morning he showed up. And then the morning after that, he showed up again. And the morning after that, he showed up again. And he kept putting his life on the line to do this little TV show just because he so believed in our values. It's American values. It's literally the most powerful thing that we own, and we can't lose them.
No, we can't. And that's the story of this country for so many immigrants and children of immigrants like myself. My father came here because America represented a special place where you could be Muslim. It didn't matter. You could be Palestinian. It doesn't matter. You could be any background. You come here, and at least there's the understanding that you're going to have a shot. It might always be the easiest shot. It's going to be a lot of work. And my dad, I have his immigrant work ethic, but it's a place that it wasn't like back home where you're born into a place and that's probably where you're going to end up in. Like you can do something more with your life.
That's right. I mean, we're not a country that promises equal results. Some people are going to be more successful than others, but we are a country that enshrined in our Constitution has this principle of equal opportunity. And we're not living up to that today.
No, so let's take a break, and we're going to come back and talk about the 2020 issues, the big issues right now, from healthcare to climate change to, I know you're outspoken about gun safety. We just had a mass shooting yesterday, and it's almost no talk whatsoever in the media, and it's so important. I'm chatting with Congressman Seth Moulton. Be right back on the Dean Obeidallah Show right after this.
The Dean Obeidallah Show.
My slogan for Trump in 2020, Trump for prison 2020.
Sirius XM Progress. Back to the Dean Obeidallah Show on Sirius XM Progress.
And welcome back to the Dean Obeidallah Show. We're live right here. Congressman Seth Moulton, a Democrat, member of Congress in Massachusetts' 6th Congressional District. He's running for president, one of the 2020 candidates. So, Congressman, we were talking about the 2020 big issues. And there's various issues. There's the ones about what you're articulating in a vision of America in terms of policy. But there's another one about what our country should stand for. And that's the idea of impeachment. And should we start impeachment of Donald Trump or not? What's your view on this?
My view is that I get the party leaders' arguments that, this is the politics of impeachment are tough. I get the polls that show the majority of Americans are not in favor of it yet. But hey, folks, how about just doing the right thing? Okay, I swore an oath to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States, not the politics of my party or the politics of the next election. And I think that eventually Democrats are going to be held accountable for not doing the right thing here by the law. I mean, when my 9-month-old daughter is in college reading about this 20 years from now, I don't want her to look back and say, yeah, the Democrats, they won the midterms to hold the president accountable, but then he didn't do anything. They were scared. That's not going to look good in the light of history, and it's not the right thing for the country. So we just got to get the courage here to uphold our values and uphold the rule of the law. The rule of law is very simple. The president breaks the law, you hold impeachment hearings.
Right.
Mueller made it clear he doesn't think he can prosecute the president under Justice Department guidelines. That's why impeachment exists.
I agree with you. I've had countless people call up, and the idea of a historical look, like to look back, and if Trump, God forbid, were to win re-election, and I have no idea what horror he will carry out, and historians will look back and go, well, they could have done an impeachment, and maybe that would have made the difference. But I also agree with you, myself as a lawyer, that constitutionally, legally, this is the right thing to do. I think you're mandated under Article 1 of the Constitution to hold them accountable. And politically, it's the wrong thing. So be it, because you fought the fight you had to fight. I'd rather we lose 2020 on doing the right thing than doing nothing and trying to calculate callously, like, well, I don't know if it's going to work out in the swing districts. Do the right thing, and Americans will respect it.
If Donald Trump goes down in history as a president who did all these horrible things, but it wasn't worth impeaching him, I mean, talk about the wrong lesson to send to our kids and our grandkids and our great-grandkids. I mean, what are you going to look back at history and say, oh, well, the Republicans, tried to hold Clinton accountable for lying about a sex act in the White House, but lying every single day, cavorting with the Russians, obstructing justice, profiting off the office. That's called violating the Emoluments Clause. I mean, the list goes on.
Right.
I mean, I don't even care if he's convicted by the Senate. What I care is that we have the conviction to do the right thing. And frankly, Mitch McConnell has got a great challenger. So one of the people that I supported back in 2018 in the midterm, she narrowly lost her House race, Amy McGrath, first woman to fly an F-A-18 in combat in the Marine Corps. I mean, tough cookie. She's an amazing leader, and she's now taking on Mitch McConnell. If the message going into the 2020 elections, when he's up for re-election himself, is the Democratic House laid out the case, made it clear, voted to impeach him, but McConnell didn't convict him, like, I'm happy with that being on McConnell's doorstep as he's trying to win re-election.
We so hope Amy McGrath wins, and I'm hopefully going to get her on this show to talk about it. By the way, the calculation is now 109 House Democrats calling for impeachment inquiry, according to MSNBC just a short time ago.
Yeah, and no one's going in the other direction. I see Catherine Clark up there. She recently changed her position to support it. No one's saying, oh, well, I used to support impeachment and now I'm against it, right? I mean, it's all, the tide is coming in here, but we've got to get our leadership on board. And
what do you make? Last week, and it seems like months ago, last week, Robert Mueller testified, and he said to Will Hurd, when he was asked about was that a one-off or are they still attacking us? And he famously said, Mueller, they're attacking us as I sit here. Yet Donald Trump is the commander-in-chief, at least on paper, in the Constitution, is showing no leadership in protecting us. And we were attacked by the Russian military, according to Mueller's indictment. This was an attack on our nation. And the man in the White House, commander-in-chief, is doing nothing, it seems like, not any leadership in tone or in rhetoric or even in policy.
Russia is the only country on earth that could wipe out every American life in about 20 minutes. Wow. And throughout our modern history, Democrat and Republican presidents alike have stood up to the Russian threat. This is so unprecedented that we have a president that was pushed into the White House by the Russians. I mean, Putin wanted him to become president, and is it any coincidence that now he's, literally cavorting with them, won't even share his private conversations with Putin with American intelligence agencies, disparages American intelligence workers on TV because he says he just believes what Putin says. I mean, this is a very serious national security issue, and it's one of the reasons why in this campaign I'm taking on Donald Trump, not just as president but as commander-in-chief. I believe he's committing dereliction of duty as commander-in-chief of the United States, failing to keep us safe. And it's not just about getting us into war with Iran, although he's trying to do that.
Right.
It's not just about the silly games with North Korea that have only made the situation more dangerous and worse. It's not about all the things that are going on in Africa and Syria and everything else under his watch. It's the fact that he fails to stand up to Russia as they're trying to fundamentally undermine our democracy, and we need to take him on here. I actually think this is one of the places where Donald Trump is weakest, but we're not having that argument.
So how do you have that argument? And as president, what would you do in response to, I mean, according to the Mueller indictment last July, it was 13 members of the GRU unit of the military, the Russian military, attacked our election. And Trump defends at Helsinki last year at this time, stunningly stands with Putin. So what would you do as commander-in-chief?
Well, I'd hold the Russians accountable. Mm-hmm. And I would not just do it on my own. I would modernize NATO. Because, see, NATO, which has always held Russia in check, for the last 70 years, NATO was founded on a 1949 framework to prevent Russia from driving tanks and shooting missiles into Europe, into Western Europe, right? Never imagined in 1949 that they'd be attacking us through the internet. So we've got to get our allies on board here and recognize that whether Russia's attacking us with missiles or by undermining our democratic elections, that's an attack on NATO, and we've got to present a unified response. And by the way, Russia has infiltrated the French elections, the German elections. We should be all in this together. So that's the approach I would take, is hold Russia accountable, but really hold them accountable by doing it with our allies.
It's unreal to see what Trump does.
Trump is doing the exact opposite. He's throwing NATO members under the bus.
And I'm chatting with Congressman Seth Moulton, Democrat running for president. So let's talk about a couple of other big issues. Healthcare is certainly the big one. Every poll shows it affects everyone's life in this country. There's a debate, Medicare for all. There's different nuanced versions. Senator Harris came up with a new plan today. Not getting too wonky on this, what is your take on first healthcare? Is it all right? And what kind of approach would you want to do to try to make this truly accessible and affordable for all Americans?
So healthcare is a fundamental human right. Mm-hmm. And I don't think any Democrats really disagree with that, but we do have this really healthy debate about how to get there.
Right.
And, my experience is I'm actually the only candidate in this race who actually gets single-payer healthcare today, because I made a commitment to continue going to the VA as a member of Congress. I said, look, as long as my fellow vets are going there and the system needs to be fixed, I'm going to go there too.
Right.
And my experience has been mixed. The VA negotiates prescription drug prices, which Medicare does not. So my prescriptions at the VA are actually cheaper than if through Medicare. Like, that's a good thing.
Right.
But at the same time, I got surgery at the VA not too long ago. And to make a long story short, they sent me home with the wrong medications. Wow. And we've all heard the stories of veterans dying on waiting lists. I had a really close Marine buddy of mine text me a few weeks ago, because he was feeling suicidal for the first time in his life. And he called the VA. It took him 48 hours to get back to him. Mm-hmm. And then they said, you can get an appointment in 3 months.
That's horrible.
He said, I'm not thinking about killing myself in 3 months. I'm thinking about killing myself tonight. That's not the healthcare system that I want to force on Americans. So I'm with President Obama on this. I believe that we need to have a public option that competes against the private healthcare companies and forces them to reduce their prices to make healthcare more affordable, but have that healthy competition. Don't force everybody onto a one-size-fits-all government system designed in 1963. And a good comparison here is with the Postal Service. If I came into the Oval Office, and the first thing I did is I said, you know what, America, we don't need FedEx, we don't need UPS. The post office is going to do it all. I mean, does anyone think that would actually improve service or lower prices? No, that competition is healthy. And this is much more serious than mail delivery, right? If we have choices for delivering our packages, we should have choices in healthcare. So I'm firmly with President Obama on this. We've got to have a public option. But I think that's the way you improve the system. And by the way, it's also the only realistic way to get it done. Because one thing we never talk about is there aren't even enough Democrats in the Democratic-controlled House right now to vote for Medicare for all. So in some ways, it's kind of an empty promise. And I want to be real with people. I don't want to deliver empty promises.
And it's interesting what you said. When I interviewed Congressman Khanna, who was a co-chair of Bernie's campaign, said I said, well, Senator Sanders, if he's president, would he sign a public option or just say no? And he said he would be pragmatic about that. So, but it's...
Well, then let's be honest about it on the campaign trail.
And I think that's interesting. That's a good question. And if you talk to Senator Sanders or Ro Khanna, but you touched on the VA, and as a vet yourself who goes there for care, I've had some people, we've done panels on veterans, because a lot of progressive veterans, and we want people to know that. Some have called and said their VA is great. Others have said it's not good at all. We talk about the VA so much. They talk about caring about veterans. Why is there not a uniform VA system that really works well for all the vets, not just lucky you happen to be geographically in an area that has a good VA?
Yeah, it's a great question because I actually have a great VA up in my home district in Massachusetts, and I've gotten really good care there. I have a great primary care physician. Like it's been excellent. All my experiences. That surgery I got was at the VA in Washington D.C., which is sort of notorious for having some problems. I had a great surgeon who actually volunteered her time there. She was a surgeon at George Washington, but she cared about vets and wanted to do some time at the VA. As she was, they were putting me under with the anesthesia to get this surgery. The last thing I remember her saying was, "Yeah, I don't really trust a bunch of the people here."
Wow!
And I'm like, "Whoa, time out! Like, can we stop this?"
It's kind of scary.
Yeah, I mean that's like so we've really it's erratic. There are a lot of issues, and part of the problem is that there's not a lot of accountability at the VA because there is no competition. They don't want me as a patient. Okay, they'd be much happier if I left. It's a little bit lower cost for them if I'm not there. There's no incentive for them to attract. So there's none of that healthy competition where they're trying to say, "No, Seth, come here because we've got the better prices and the better outcomes." That's the kind of system that we need because you're not going to just get the best healthcare system by trying to mandate it. For everything else in America, competition. Now, competition with guardrails. Like, that's why Obamacare set up these conditions. Like, you can't discriminate against people with pre-existing conditions. You have to offer health care to people who are 26 on their parents' plans. Like, that's why we have these guardrails. It's a regulated market. But some competition is okay.
And it's interesting, too, you bring up ACA and how you have Trump literally lying to his audience at his kickoff in Orlando saying, "I'm going to protect pre-existing conditions," while at the exact same time, his lawyers at the DOJ are in the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals arguing to strike the ACA and coverage of pre-existing conditions. And
it's totally hypocritical.
It's going to affect people's lives. I mean, I don't agree with Trumpers, but I don't want them and their family to suffer, not get coverage because Trump lied to them and they didn't question it. The guy really is trying to take your coverage away as we sit here today, folks. It's not an exaggeration.
For millions of Americans.
Right.
Millions of Americans.
And lying to people about it. At least if he would go out there and go, "I'm trying to take your coverage away, folks. Suck it up." Well, at least he's being honest. So let's talk about, we got a few more minutes left here. You've talked about climate change. It's a big issue. We've covered a lot as an existential threat to our nation, the world.
Yeah.
What would you do as president? How do you address this, which seems like a huge global problem? How would you address it as president?
Well, first of all, we got to be leading again. And a lot of Democrats say we got to get back in Paris. I would say we got to go much farther than that. And why, by the way, is it called the Paris Accord and not the Washington Accord? I mean, we should be setting the pace here for the rest of the world. We should be leading the world, and we should be saying to the developed world, this is how you produce power in a carbon-free way. And by the way, we're going to develop those technologies here in America and sell them to the rest of the world. I don't want to be buying solar panels from China like we're doing today. We should be developing the most advanced solar panels and selling them to the rest of the world. So that's one point on leadership. The second point, though, is some conservative critics will say, well, a lot of carbon now is coming from the developing world, and that's actually fair. Like that's a fair point. But again, you solve that through technology. It's just different technologies. It's not by building massive carbon-free, solar power plants. It's by developing the distributed energy power technologies to go to places that are off the electrical grid and need to produce power in a safe way too. So we've got to tackle that problem, but again, we do it through innovative leadership here in America. The final thing is carbon capture is actually something we have to have a discussion about because some climate activists are against it because they say, oh, if you agree to carbon capture, you're just allowing people to continue to pollute.
So what is carbon capture? People don't know what that is.
So yeah, because carbon capture is like literally taking carbon out of the atmosphere that's already there. Okay. It's like the most advanced technologies just in theory would like vacuum it up. But there's already too much carbon up there anyway, so we've got to do this. We've got to do this as part of the solution. It's the only way to undo the damage that's already happened. So some people say, okay, Seth, that's great, but how are you going to do this? Like politically, how do you do it? Well, you got to find a way to sell this to people who are opposed. Like we already got all the folks. All the folks on your show are probably like, hey, yeah, I'm on board.
Got to do something, exactly. Right.
How do you sell to the votes you need, the conservatives and whatnot, to get this actually passed through Congress and not have a big backlash like Macron did in France or Trudeau did in Canada? I talk a lot about the national security implications of climate change because they're real. Everybody in the military knows it. The DOD knows it. But it's also something that resonates with conservatives. You know, I talk about how a lot of power companies actually want a carbon tax. That's not just a liberal thing. Power companies want it because they just want to know what the price is going to be. Like, they don't want to invest in solar thinking, okay, well, next year they might take the credit away. Like, they just want to know going forward what the plan is here. So I'm a big supporter of a carbon tax.
And I know we're going through, we got a couple more minutes left. There was just a mass shooting yesterday in a fair in California. We have, on average, 30 Americans killed by gun violence every day. Probably about 100 lose their lives involving a gun daily, from suicides, accidental deaths. You've been very outspoken on trying to reduce the number of deaths. You know, you were a military guy. Are these acceptable losses, what we're having in our country? Thousands of Americans dying every year?
It's disgusting, and it's because Congress won't do anything. That's the bottom line.
So what do you do as president? How do you move them?
Well, first of all, I've got credibility on this issue. Mm-hmm. You know, I'm the only candidate in the race who's had to use a gun for my job in the military. And I was actually in combat.
Sure,
right?
I understand.
And in that, look, that experience, guns have saved my life. Okay, I carried 2 guns with me everywhere I went in Iraq. But weapons of war have no place on our streets or in our schools. And I can have this argument and make this case because I get it, because I've used guns and I understand the difference between a hunting rifle and an assault rifle. If you're a hunter who says you need an assault rifle, let me come give you some shooting lessons, okay? You don't know what the hell you're doing with a gun. All right? It's just like, we don't need grenades to hunt either. You can hunt quite effectively with grenades, okay?
Sure.
We don't allow it because those are weapons of war, and we don't allow them here, okay? I had grenades on me. I literally walked around with 2 grenades every single day in Iraq. Okay, never blew myself up. I can totally handle grenades perfectly safely. How would you feel if I had 2 grenades sitting on the table here?
I would be concerned.
Right.
Why
and so we said
have 2 grenades in the office.
So we said as a society, we said, we're not going to allow that stuff in America.
Right.
So this is just common sense, and we've got to break through the politics of this. And look, I will do Kamala Harris has said, I'll just pass things through executive action. Sure, I'll use that threat. But what we really need to do is jam this through Congress so that the next Congress, the next president doesn't undo it.
I so wish, you know, as president, you would do these things. This is great stuff, and I wish you the best. Thanks for coming in the studio.
Yeah. Look, if you like anything you heard, go to SethMoulton.com, throw in $1 donation so I can get in the debate stage. I think these views should be part of the debate. You asked, how do we take on these national security issues and make them part of the debate? Well, get me on the debate stage.
I wish you were on the debate stage Tuesday and Wednesday.
Because I'm not going to be on Tuesday and Wednesday. I know I got in the race late because of my young daughter at home. But look,
I hope you get September's debates because I think you have a lot to add.
Thank you.
And especially your background as a veteran is very unique, and your world experience is very unique on this. And I think it's a voice that needs to be added to the national conversation. So I wish you the best, and I hope you can get on the debate stage in September. We're like, there's Congressman Moulton. So Congressman Moulton, very nice meeting you, my friend. I wish you the best in the campaign. We'll take a quick break after this. Be right back.
The Dean Obeidallah Show.
I think Trump clips...